Okay, we are there. Welcome to the first seminar of the College of Divinity's Theology Research Network this year. I begin by acknowledging the Garigal clan of the Gaimaragal people, upon whose ancestral lands I live. In the Eora language, spoken by many Aboriginal peoples in and around what is modern Sydney, Warami, good to see you. I'm Doru Costache, a Romanian Orthodox priest and an associate professor of theology at the College of Divinity. I chair the TRN, Theology Research Network, which today inaugurates its third thematic series at the intersection of art, spirituality, and theology. This series is organized in cooperation with the SCD's Graduate Research School, represented by its coordinator, Professor Constantine Campbell, Professor of Biblical Studies and Research Director. By the way, Con is also a jazz musician. He will lead the Q&A section of this event. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce the first speaker of this series, Dr. Peter Bouteneff, Professor of Systematic Theology and Kulik Professor of Sacred Arts, as well as founding director of the Institute of Sacred Arts at St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary in Yonkers, New York. Peter is a jazz musician too, a lover of theology and the arts, and an assiduous researcher of Arvo Pärt's music. This interest resulted in the monograph Arvo Pärt, Out of Silence, 2015, and the co-edited volume Arvo Pärt, Sounding the Sacred, published in 2020. Peter hosts the podcast Luminous Conversations on Sacred Arts. The topic he will be addressing today is the study of the sacred arts in a theological context. And I'd like to just show you a few things just to leave more room for people to arrive. This is Peter's official profile at St. Vladimir's. This is his very interesting website, Theology Praxis Music, and this is his podcast, Luminous, which is really mind-blowing, the diversity of topics and the guests he's hosting. It's beautiful. Now, without further ado, it's important to respect the speaker. We switch off our microphones during the presentation, and those of you who do not wish their faces to appear in the video recording or in snapshots, please turn off your cameras too. Peter, the floor is yours, and welcome. And thank you very much for your efforts. It's so late in that part of the world.
Well, thank you so much, Father Doru, for the lovely introduction. Thank you to you and to Con Campbell for the invitation. It's an honor, and I was invited by Father Doru to be fairly informal. I will be somewhat informal and go in and out of, just kind of personal. I mean, how I got started with all this, but respecting your time and ensuring that there's some kind of substance there too, that you can kind of grapple with, take interest in, and bring into the discussion during the second part of our time here. So you've mentioned that I'm a musician and all of that. That was my first training, was in music, in jazz and ethnomusicology at New England Conservatory way back when. And I've been a musician ever since, in jazz, but also conducting church choirs. Just music is part of my DNA. But so is theology. It came later, but I started doing theology. And it was only in the last 10, 12 years, because I've been teaching at this seminary for 25 now. So about 10 or 12 years ago, the two really came together in a way that has been very, very gratifying for me, intellectually, personally, spiritually, and all that good stuff. let me I will go in and out of kind of the personal side of this, but just to get a bit theoretical about, the study of the sacred arts, there's obviously a very wide variety of ways and contexts within which to do it, across the religious spectrum and across the artistic spectrum. Grounded as I am in the Orthodox Christian Church and in an Eastern Orthodox Christian seminary, there is a certain uh, logic or a kind of a natural uh, magnetic pull towards the arts, partly because of being a very liturgically robust tradition among the Christian traditions, and a liturgy that is unashamedly and kind of almost exaggeratedly in love with the sensory, the artistic, the creative um, expression of peoples. In a seminary, you have no choice but to be, for example, training people how to sing. Um, and not only how to sing, but why you're singing, and to teach people about the content of what you're singing. So hymnography, which involves poetry, involves rhetoric, you know. You don't necessarily at a seminary teach people how to paint icons because I think very few people are called to do that, but you teach people to appreciate them, understand their language, and somehow use them in one's own life and in a kind of preaching setting. Icons are, among other things, teachers of theology. A liturgically based tradition and a seminary, it's not too far away. It's not too big a stretch to be then kind of focusing on the arts theologically. So one of the sort of founding uh, founding parents of our seminary is a liturgical theologian named Father Alexander Schmemann. Some of you will know his name. And one of the kind of signature elements of his liturgical theology was that liturgy and theology weren't kind of two separate tracks, as it were, or two separate disciplines, even. And he used to say frequently and write, uh, all theology should be liturgical. In other words, all theology shouldn't simply be a kind of a mind exercise, but it should be kind of grounded in prayer and in corporate prayer, um, with its set texts and rites, you know. So theology should be liturgical, but he said all liturgy should be theological. So liturgy has its own logic and grounding in the church's teaching uh, about God, about the world, about creation, about salvation. So liturgy, its job is to kind of be the place where all of this is expressed, um, and expressed in the language of poetry and art. So he said all theology should be liturgical, all liturgy must be theological. So again, in a setting like that, you're establishing a very organic context within which to reflect on the arts. Um, One reason I find the arts so refreshing to teach and to talk about is, my other sort of day job at the seminary is teaching dogmatic theology, systematic theology, and there's many aspects of that that I love very much. But there is, obviously one is teaching, fixed dogmas of the church a lot of the time, which, yes, are very are beautiful, but the arts give kind of, in a way, still more latitude for multiple entry points and multiple ways of receiving them and having them act on us and having us act on them, being the arts. So uh, the the Institute of Sacred Arts, I'll say a little bit more how it kind of came into being, but it's uh, some of its kind of signature characteristics are that it's an institute not of sacred music nor of sacred painting, but of the sacred arts. So it's holistic, it's multidisciplinary. That in itself is interesting and challenging, you know. But it's also it attempts to, uh, without being doctrinaire, but it attempts to be theologically inquisitive. You know, so some of our early colloquia that we hosted just they queried even the term sacred arts. What is it a useful term? What does it mean? Can an object be sacred in and of itself? Is its holiness somehow inherent, or is it a function of people's veneration and love? It's the kind of question that one doesn't always necessarily bring to the artistic discipline, but we do, and it's interesting and fun. So that's sort of the just a beginning of kind of the logic of the institute and I'll towards the end of my time I'll give some specific examples of some of the projects we're involved in. Um, how it came into being, Father Doru mentioned my connection with the person and music of Arvo Pärt, the Estonian composer. A show of hands among you if you've heard of Arvo Pärt. Um, okay, a lovely smattering of folks. Uh, so he's still living. He's going to turn 90 this year, which will be the occasion of many celebrations. He is statistically, uh, for the past 7 or 8 years, the most performed living composer in the world. Or some of these 7 years, he's been the second most, behind John Adams. But he's vastly popular. Once you've heard his name, as you have tonight, you'll Google him, or you'll suddenly see like oh, there's a concert program and he's on it, you know. So he is of interest because not just because he is confessionally an Orthodox Christian, but because uh, since 1976, all of his compositions have been settings of sacred text. And what makes it even more interesting, if I may, there's a lot of sacred composers, fantastic, congratulations. You're setting a mass, all power to you. But he's also, he has a reach beyond most classical composers. So he's not only admired by kind of aficionados of contemporary classical music and the concert halls. He's admired by jazz aficionados, by heavy metal fans, by all kinds of experimental music fans and artists and dancers um, and poets. They're all oh, Arvo Pärt, I love Arvo Pärt. Um, it's almost uncanny, and so that's certainly one of the reasons, apart from myself being so compelled by his music, one of the reasons I thought, this needs some excavation here. Why does this person have this kind of um, traction in the wider world outside of either churchy circles, which are often very boring as far as their engagement with art and culture, and apart from modern classical aficionado circles. I won't say they can also be boring, but hey, we can all be boring. Anyway, so I wanted to sort of explore that. So building on a connection that I had made with him some years prior at a monastery, I my colleagues and I worked to convince him. This is 2012. to come to New York, receive an honorary doctorate from our seminary, and more importantly, have his music performed at Carnegie Hall in New York. And um, he agreed, which means that, uh-oh, we actually had to do this and make it happen, which was one of the most challenging undertakings of my life. But where this gets really interesting is that when we went to Estonia to visit with him and his wife and to uh, speak about this possibility, uh, there was being built an Arvo Pärt Center in Estonia, an archive, a museum, a concert hall, and it's beautiful. It exists now and it's fully built. It was inaugurated about 7 years ago. But as they were building it, they told me and my colleagues, we get questions from people as to how Arvo Pärt's music relates to the Orthodox Church. How is it commensurate with Orthodox theology? How does it kind of relate to Orthodox theology? And Arvo Pärt himself said to me, I'm not even sure myself. I need the help of people like you. You're at a seminary, and I thought, oh boy, this is a task. You know, uh, but we did. We began exploring that question, and the book that Father Doru mentioned, Arvo Pärt, Out of Silence. Do I have a copy to show you? I don't think so. Um, but it came out of that, and I'll just briefly mention the way I explored the music in the book. Why? Because it addresses tonight's topic of the study of sacred arts. So it's an interesting case because uh, many of the sacred arts that one studies are liturgical arts. You know, they are hymnography, they are church compositions, they are, um, church architecture, church poetry, etc. Uh, Pert's music is not composed for liturgical use. He has, like many classical composers, set the Mass a couple of times. It is the Roman Catholic, the Western Mass. The Creed has the Filioque and everything, uh, and he sets otherwise kind of liturgical prayers, but they're not meant for use in the liturgy. So this is the study of a paraliturgical artist. But how to study him theologically? Well, a couple of ways. Um, I studied the way in which he sets sacred texts in order to express his reverence for them. So in this way, the book gets slightly musically technical because I have to explain some things about, you know, time, tempo, you know, time signatures, etc. Um, but the more kind of theological section of the book is the last section of the book, where I analyze his entire kind of compositional system in terms of um, Orthodox Christian texts and Christology, in ways that it was an experiment. I think one of the things that I was doing, and that I think applies to a lot of the theological study of the arts, is that we can't dictate um, some of these things for sure. All we can do is propose connections. So when you're saying, how does Arvo Pärt's music express some kind of Orthodox theological truth? Uh, I begin with many caveats. One, uh, if he's Orthodox and writing beautiful music, you don't have to be Orthodox to listen to it. You don't have to be Orthodox to understand it and appreciate it. The Orthodox don't hold some kind of special key that unlocks his music, right? So you don't want to be excluding anybody from the project. Secondly, as I was suggesting, this is all, uh, uh, you try to distinguish causation from correlation, right? So in other words, you distinguish um, if you say that there's an Orthodox principle of bright sadness or something like that, uh, you don't necessarily say that, oh, because Arvo Pärt is Orthodox, he necessarily subscribes to this and applies it to his music. All you can say is like, I've noticed this connection. If this works for you in helping you understand his music, wonderful. If not, that's fine. Just read on to the next chapter, you know. And I've had numerous conversations with him and his wife after writing the book, and they were very illuminating. There were things that they disagreed with that I wrote, but I pushed back and I said, no, I disagree with you. You might have written the music, but as an audience member, I have a right to a certain interpretation. Um, but in the end, they liked it very much, and the book was translated into Estonian, by the Arvo Pärt Center. Um, since then, it's been translated also into Ukrainian. Uh, I think a Russian translation is in process. So that's it on the Arvo Pärt thing, and I hope you might ask me questions about him. Feel free. Let me just, in my last 5, 7 minutes of my monologue before we get into Q&A, I'll talk about our institute because basically out of this study of Pärt, we thought, well, let's get theological about all of the art forms and the liturgical arts and in all of their diversity. So over time, we engaged my now colleague for the past 5 years, Rosita Schroeder, is an art historian, a Bulgarian who came to America some decades ago and studied Byzantine art and history and the sacred arts, and taught it, and now teaches at St. Vladimir's. Um, Sadly, she's halfway across America in Wisconsin, so she teaches remotely by Zoom. But she covers the visual arts and art history and Byzantine art history. Um, Iconography, again, we don't teach so much how to paint, but we do host workshops by the great iconographer George Cordis, who is not only a master iconographer, but a theologian also. He has painted churches in Australia. I have to recall where his churches are, but they're worth a visit. Musicology is taught by my longtime friend and colleague, Alexander Lingus, who's also artistic director of a choral ensemble, Capella Romana, but also a very distinguished Byzantine um, musicologist. And so we kind of have, therefore, kind of visual arts, musicology, iconography, and theology covered from the faculty perspective. And then we have people joining us as visiting faculty periodically um, to great effect. Everybody wins when that happens. Um, what do we do? We have a curriculum. Each semester, we run on a 2-semester schedule, autumn and spring. Each semester, there will be an elective on one or another theme within the sacred arts, whether it's introduction to Byzantine iconography, whether it is uh, liturgy and the arts. This semester, Rosita Schroeder and I are co-teaching a course called Creation in the Church's Art and Theology, which is a great deal of fun. We talk about how human and especially non-human creation is depicted in iconography, especially, but also somewhat in music. Father Doru, I just would love to have you as a guest in this class if it weren't 2 in the morning, because you have written so much on the theme of creation and specifically the arts. And I mean, we have a lot to talk about. So that's an example of our curriculum. Um, We have about once, sometimes twice a year, we'll host symposia or panel discussions or lectures. I mentioned one of our early ones on kind of the question of what makes this or that art sacred. It's an interesting question. And we're about to publish a volume that is emanating from our early symposia, a collected, edited volume of some truly world-class scholars, um, most of them believing, some not, from different disciplines within the artistic panoply, and on this question, what are the sacred arts and what makes something sacred? We had a symposium on tradition and innovation in the sacred arts that George Cordis was the sort of feature speaker at. And then this past January, we hosted the great emeritus Byzantine art historian Henry Maguire, who delivered our Alexander Schmemann lecture on the theme of light in art and Neoplatonism and its influence on Byzantine art. I mean, fascinating stuff. And we so are hoping to increase our publications in the coming couple of years, and we continue to do a few public events where, for example, an Arvo Pärt concert in New York City. Recently, at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, there was an exhibit called Africa and Byzantium, which was utterly fascinating. And one of our students interned at that exhibit, and so she gave us and our friends a extensive guided tour of that exhibit. So that's the kind of thing we do. That's the kind of philosophy behind it. That's my personal kind of entry place in it. And now I am delighted to shut up at least for a moment while while the questions and comments uh, develop, and I'd be delighted to interact with you.
Um, Thank you so much, Peter. So great to hear you speak about your work and Arvo Pärt and raising so many questions for us as we kick off this new series, exploring theology and the arts, spirituality and the arts. I think, yeah, we could have a really long conversation. Actually, I'm going to be in New York in November. Maybe we should have a conversation.
Fantastic.
But I it's interesting. I was turned on to Arvo Pärt by a jazz musician, a fellow jazz musician, another saxophonist, and instantly fell in love with his music, and then discovered that lots of other jazz musicians were really into him, as you mentioned earlier. And in fact, there's a very prominent pianist in Australia by the name of Andrea Keller. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's recently done her doctorate on Pärt, and in particular, looking at his compositional processes for improvisational practice.
Oh,
Um, and so it's
wow.
really interesting. I heard a seminar on it where she's sort of trying to explain how she's sort of using some of his techniques to facilitate group improvisation and all that kind of thing. And this is not really part of the sacred side of the conversation, but I just thought it'd be interesting to raise it with you in case you've heard of her, and if not, maybe you'd like to explore what that's about, especially given that you're a jazz musician as well. Um, but one question I asked her is the same question I'd like to ask you before I. And sorry, by the way, I'm taking the first question, everybody. But the question I asked her, which I'll ask you as well, is what do you think it is about his music that appeals so much to jazz musicians?
Hmm.
Do you have any thoughts about that?
There's one like really practical uh, reason, and that is that the label that sort of discovered him and publishes him is ECM, which
Ah,
is
yeah.
kind of the quintessential. I mean, it's a whole, ECM. It's a whole kind of a brand of music since the 1970s of improvised music.
Mm,
And when they discovered him, they launched a whole series called ECM New Series of through
mm,
composed music, but he was the kind of the beginning of that. And so, for for people who are already steeped in ECM world, he was kind of a gateway drug to other kind of contemporary classical and not only contemporary classical, but also kind of um, medieval and kind of what's so-called early music, which is often much kind of simpler and more pared down. And I think that is so that's kind of the practical reason, ECM. But I think uh, in the same way that many jazz musicians are attracted to Bach, you read like Mengus's autobiography, and he's just in love with Bach, and Bach just is this, in many ways, obviously very complex, but also very uh, pure. Uh, and it may be complex, but it's uncomplicated music. And so there's a relationship there, I think, what attracts many jazz musicians. And then to kind of close the circle, Arvo Pärt is uh, kind of insanely devoted to Bach. Some of his early compositions uh, are verbatim quotations, from Bach, sometimes forwards or sometimes backwards. But so, I mean, that there might be a hint there. There might be a hint there.
Thank you. That's really
But
helpful.
great
Um,
question.
I'd love to open up to everyone else if you have questions for Peter or comments. Go ahead, Diana.
Oh, thank you very much, Professor Peter, for that illuminating exposition on sacred art. I'm a tapestry weaver, and I also studied theology with Father Doru and became Orthodox. And I'm also a professor of visual art. So, what I loved about your book was your discussion of the interweaving of the structural aspects of musical notation with the actual sacred texts, so
Mhm.
that you talk about long, medium, and short phrases. And I actually thought that this was something that could be interpreted in weaving. But could you just comment on this idea a little bit more?
Uh, Sometimes there's a couple of really emblematic quotes of the composer. Uh, he says, "The words write my music." Uh,
Yes.
and then at other points, he says, "My music is nothing but a translation of the words." That's another interesting kind of concept. What does it mean to translate something from a spoken or written form to a musical form? What does that even mean? Um, and you could you could imagine that almost viscerally as or intuitively. Gosh, that passage, reminded me of springtime or something like that. Which is completely valid and beautiful. In his case, though, it is um, almost an almost slavish obedience to the rhythm of the spoken word. So it's obedient to how many syllables a word has, where the word is accented, and that will dictate whether the music will have short, medium, or long duration. Um, so uh, I am saying something. Uh, so the music will sound like I am saying something, right? And so it sounds pretty prosaic, doesn't it? But what the music is doing is that it is uh, amplifying and making comprehensible the words. Why? Because he loves the words. He has a reverence for what they're saying. And so it sounds like, when you hear the word obedience, it sounds like you are suppressing your creativity. But fascinatingly and counterintuitively, what's happening is that it's giving a structure to that creativity, you know, uh, like any art form. I imagine this is the case in tapestry as well. You have a pattern, you have something that you're trying to depict, and yet you are also free in other ways. So yeah, no, I'm glad that that resonated with you when you read the book, and I hope that just those few words I just said were helpful.
Thank you. Yes, very.
Robert, please go ahead, Robert.
Peter, thank you very much for your presentation, and particularly staying up to the small hours for our benefit. Given his very advanced age, I presume, and I know very little, but I'm afraid, but I presume he lived under Soviet rule for a long time. And also, you mentioned he's very attracted to Bach, and of course, Lutheranism is a very important part of Estonian tradition. So I just
Yes.
wondered, in terms of the religious and ideological environment, he's Orthodox, his culture is largely Lutheran, dominated by a totalitarian atheist ideology. I wonder if you could say something about the role those realities played in his life.
Yeah, that's great. Um, he was born in a religiously mixed marriage, one parent Lutheran, one parent Orthodox, but he was, if anything, raised Lutheran. Uh, and so 1935, he was born uh, squarely within the first kind of Soviet period. There were two Soviet periods in Estonia, interrupted by 2 years of a Nazi German period. So it was never really fun being Estonian until more recently. But so he uh, he began taking an interest in Orthodoxy in the early 1970s, and uh, began kind of getting drawn into the Orthodox Church simultaneously as with the time that he was being drawn into Western Gregorian chant. So the music that kind of converted him to his eventual compositional style was Western. The spirituality that to which he converted and the liturgy to which he converted was Eastern. I think he still considers himself a very ecumenical kind of Christian, but he certainly attends the Orthodox Church. But being under Soviet occupation meant that the kind of music he was conducting in his early years in the 60s was being very closely watched and dictated in many ways. It had to take certain forms. And when he composed his work called Credo, it was not a setting of the Nicene Creed, but the words were, "I believe in Jesus Christ." Somewhat religious affiliation there. It fell afoul of the authorities, and well, he didn't have to emigrate at that point. He emigrated Estonia in around 1980, I believe, and yeah, I think that's right, and returned only in the late 1990s. But he lived under an absolute, Soviet occupation there for most of his life.
Thank you.
Mm.
Thanks, Robert and Peter. Anyone else have questions for Peter? Comments?
Sam Caldas.
Oh, yes, I do have a question. That's right.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bouteneff. So I wanted to ask you more like a practical question about liturgical music in new cultural settings. So I'm from a Coptic Orthodox college here in Sydney, I know you've had a lot of interactions with the Coptic Church at St. Vlad's. And so the Coptic Church in the diaspora at the moment is in a sort of interesting place where there's a sense that widely held sense that traditional Coptic liturgical chant is somehow discordant with the musical culture of the West. And so there's all sorts of creative attempts going on to enculturate a foreign musical tradition, to something that can be sung and appreciated in a new setting. And, so I know the OCA went through something similar and has reached a sort of equilibrium. But at the moment, there are so many, everything from Coptic hymns set to 4-part harmony to sort of more like evangelical style with guitars. And, it's a sort of...
Tremendous. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and amid all of that, like sort of debate and discussion about that sort of thing, I wonder if you have any insights you can share from all of this work. Like what does good liturgical enculturation look like?
What a tremendous question. It's a very moving question. And to be honest, I was more aware of movements within iconography in the Coptic Church, kind of pro and contra. I was unaware, and I'm not sure how much in America there have been the same degree of musical experimentation. Do you know, Sam, whether that has been taking place in America as well?
It definitely has, yeah, a little bit,
Okay.
not everywhere. But yeah, the 4-part harmony I was referring to is coming from somewhere in California. There's a church that's experimented with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for one, I think we all have to, experimentation is inevitable. And I think that on the whole, it is not dangerous. There won't be any collateral damage here. The worst that can happen is something doesn't take. It feels like, in the very big picture, liturgy and its arts, they function, like a wiki. What stays because it's kind of received. Sometimes it takes time for it to be received, right? But if it stays because people want it there, and that's almost the test more than anything else. I mean, unless it's somehow the content of it is demonstrably heretical or something, but the form of it is it's for us. We're the church. I don't know. Maybe that's too radical, but that said, so you experiment. Not every experiment is going to work or take hold. But even wanting to do it, wanting to try it, is a sign of love. It's a sign of that you love the words that you're trying to sing, and you're committed to making them stick with people and find their way into their hearts. So all of our different churches and jurisdictions and ethnic odysseys, whether in Australia, in Western Europe, especially, or in America, they're all, if you look at the last few decades, it's all just kind of fits and starts, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps towards more indigenization, 1 step back, and in the big picture, I'm in my 60s now. It's like it's all fine, it's all okay. We'll all survive. You know, uh, it, you know, in the big picture. I hope I'm not sounding too flip about all this. I care about it a very great deal. Um, and there's certain things that you can point to that sound really, really different, but that somehow manage to work. You know, one commonly invoked example is a Russian-American composer, Vlad Morozan, came up with a setting of the Easter, Paschal melody, Christ is risen, set to kind of an Appalachian, you know, mid-coastal South, Eastern mountain culture, and their folk music. And it's absolutely charming, and it's and churches all over the place and monasteries are singing it, you know. It was discovered by some, you know, group of Georgian singers, you know, in um, you know, so that's an example of something that took. Why did it take? There's no measure, but it took, you know. So I don't know. What do you think? I mean, how's it going? Do you feel like it should or shouldn't be experimented with, or
No, I mean, I agree very strongly with you, and I'm actually quite excited at the yeah, that experimentation is happening. And I think it's mostly happening very organically, which is a really good sign. And, you know, the four-part harmony stuff happened because there were some musically trained people in that congregation who heard some Coptic tunes and were like, oh, I wonder if that would work. You know, in that case, it
nice?
worked really well. I mean, I think what you're saying about this sort of reassuring sense that it will work itself out eventually is probably an important intervention as well, because the temperature in those conversations can get,
It
you know, just
can.
online, people have very strong opinions about this sort of thing, and it
Yeah,
becomes,
music hits you in the gut, you know, so you feel strongly about it. I think one thing I would say is that to try for neither side, you know, the purist side and the more experimental side, to say that, you know, ours is the only way this should be done. That's, I think, what one would avoid, you know. Uh, I know some Coptic music purists, you know, they're really committed um, to kind of preserving these oral traditions, and you know that's so wonderful. I mean, it's beautiful, and there's some young people who are doing this, you know.
yeah,
But they also don't say it's the only way to do it, you know, but just like they love it, they're doing it, it works for them and for their, you know, their congregation, you know, fantastic, you know. But if somebody else is experimenting with it, as long as they also don't say, "Oh, the purist way is absolutely we're done with that. The church doesn't need it anymore." You know, that would be a pity.
no, thank you
Uh,
so much.
Yes, thank you. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Doru.
Yep. Thanks, Colin, and thank you very much, Peter. It's beautiful to listen to you and this interaction with the audience. It's indeed a serious topic, at least for us Orthodox. I don't know, people who are less familiar with the Orthodox tradition, how much they realize the extent of the problem with a very conservative cast of our tradition, especially liturgically speaking. The word innovation is anathema in most circles, and yeah, it's so refreshing to hear this message, the fact that there's room for flexibility, for creativity. Personally, I believe in the power of the tradition to create, and the best stuff that we have ever come up with in the very whatever revered Byzantine past, at least for us Orthodox. Orthodox of a certain kind, this kind, your kind, yeah, Diana's kind, is well, the most beautiful moments were those when people took upon themselves to become trailblazers. This is something that church historians in the Orthodox tradition seem unable to appreciate. But moments of, let's call it, crisis for the established view or custom and so on and so forth, ended up becoming the most significant things that ever happened in the past of our church. So it's very important, and I think it's a mandate for a traditionally minded person to rethink the mandate, the calling of creativity.
Mm. Mm.
So, but that's just a general comment. I want to show how I met Peter first time academically. It was this book, which was for me. I remember we had some email exchange back in the day. I don't remember when it was, perhaps early 2000s or something. I said, "Well, this is my Bible," and he said, "Really?" Yeah, because I'm an aficionado of all things Genesis, and Peter's book, Beginnings, is still something that guides my views of the creation since he mentioned that. I showed the audience this book because I find it fascinating, Peter. You are a Renaissance man. Doctrine of creation in the biblical traditions and early Christian traditions, musicology, doctrine. Last time, or actually the only time we met in the flesh was in Volos, the international conference of IOTA, the International Orthodox Theological Association, and you're talking about how do we grapple with all these orthodoxies or something along these lines. And yeah, so amazing. And I believe that this is the calling of a genuine theologian. To be able to survey the whole of the landscape of the ecclesial experience and come up with something, a prophetic voice. And I believe that yours is a prophetic voice, and so is Arvo Pärt, your muse, your inspiration. In many undertakings. I have a question because I hope that others will have more stuff to say. You mentioned at some point a critical question, how traditional or liturgical is Pärt's creativity? And of course, you said he isn't a liturgical composer. He even has doubts about this. You said, well, I beg to differ. I might find something liturgically new that you don't even see. The way we read poetry, for example. Okay, the poets had an idea, but the truth, where is the truth? Where is beauty? In the eye of the beholder, yeah? And I'd want you, if possible, to delve further in this topic. What does he teach in terms of liturgical creativity? I know that's not what he does, and you bombarded us with caveats, but because he's an Orthodox person and his voice is prophetic, is his example teaching us anything implicitly, indirectly, in terms of ways ahead for, let's say, Orthodox liturgics? Sorry for the convoluted thing.
Yeah. So does Pärt have something to teach us liturgically, is your question?
Yeah.
You know, he is ironically, is a very kind of a traditional Orthodox in the sense that he thinks the liturgy is something you don't sort of mess with in any way. He quotes this conversation he had with a monk, where he asked the monk, can I write new prayers? Now you and I would say, of course you can write new prayers, but this monk says, no, all of the prayers have already been written. So and our dear prophet Arvo Pärt, swallows that hook, line, and sinker. And so when it comes to liturgy is fixed and untouchable, and the formally liturgical arts are too. And so his sphere of indisputed creativity and prophecy and maverick art is not liturgical. And in a way that's his safety position, is that, I'm not composing liturgy now. And I'm certainly not composing new words of my own invention. So that gives you it may not be the answer you were expecting, but I think it's a great question, and it invites this paradox, his prophetic character has a certain sphere within which it doesn't go. It doesn't dare tread.
Yeah, I hear you.
And
But
God bless him.
the closest term of comparison would be, from my viewpoint, Saint Simeon the New Theologian. He wasn't on the path of making new liturgies and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But he, down the track of history, he managed to impact
Yes.
the entire Orthodox spirituality, including liturgical, in ways that aren't even acknowledged today.
Mm.
So who knows down the track?
It's true, but just as a coda on this point, I, there's a certain sense in which the formally liturgical arts they exist in the service of us, the people, the church, and that's why. So right now behind you, I see an icon of Jesus Christ, and I know it's him because I know that the nimbus has a cross in it, and that the hair and the beard are very traditionally depicted. I don't know where it's from. That could be Romanian, Bulgarian, Cretan, Russian. It could be fairly modern. It could be 17th. We don't know, because across all of these times and cultures, that's how you're going to know it's Jesus, right? So your scope for creativity, there's still considerable scope in how you depict him, what colors, etc. Well, even the colors are going to be pretty generally blue and red when it comes to his vestments, because you want the people to know what they're seeing. This is the vernacular. This is the vocabulary, you know. Right behind you, there's the Mother of God holding Jesus. And I know it with a tiny zoom icon, because it's immediately recognizable. And so, again, within the formally liturgical arts, maybe, the leeway for creativity is of a different nature. And we could talk for a while about exactly what that is, but it's not the same scope that we're given for liturgical, like actual usefulness, seems to me. So maybe Arvo's right.
Thank you so much. I think our time is up. I don't know if I'm certain that we could go on forever. It's such an illuminating experience having you in our midst, Peter. So there you have it, another liturgical trope.
Oh,
we are in many places, yet we are still in one place.
yes.
Given this attunement of one another, and I'm personally grateful. I'm certain that my gratitude also expresses the gratitude of the group. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Uh,
Bless you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're a hero, and really we appreciate your generosity, your insightful presentation.
It was a total delight. I so much appreciate the invitation and your questions, and thanks. I'm going to go to sleep now.
Thanks so much, Peter.
Yeah. So we also, Con and I, thank you and the participants and the interest you all showed. We will send word before the next seminar, which we hope will take place in April. Meanwhile, keep an eye on the YouTube channel and the Facebook page of TRN, the Theology Research Network. And on this note, let me salute you or say farewell in the same Eora language of the Sydney Basin. Didgerigura Yana Janawi. Thank you for walking with me. All the best, everyone. Thank you very much, Peter. Lovely to see you. And it has been a festival for mind and heart. All the best, everyone.
All the best. Bye-bye.